Hey, Jonathan.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. It's fun to talk to you.
I know it is.
So, I always like to intro the authors that I'm chatting with, if I actually know them in real life, which I do know you in real life, with how we met. And I can't remember how we met.
We share a drug dealer.
That's true. We do. Yeah.
No,
We have the
I'm
same person giving us our MDMA at raves, because that's my
no,
lifestyle.
because that's what I do too. It's
Yeah.
just circuit parties, raves, and
Uh,
writing articles about some denominational squabble. I I think I think we met on social media,
I know, right? It's like that
or like maybe at a
nebulous.
conference. Maybe at like a conference. No,
Probably on social media. I think
probably
the
on
first
social
time we
media.
met in person was we got together. I was in New York, and I was like, "Hey, let's get
Oh
together."
yes. You went and saw, what did you see? And I remember Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Yeah, yeah,
And
boo.
you told me, "Don't see that." You told me, "See, Come From Away." And my daughters were like, "We don't want to see. We want to see Charlie and the Chocolate Factory." And I should have heeded your advice because it
Yeah,
was a
Come From Away
terrible.
was still running into,
I
I mean, it
know.
just kept running and running. People love it.
It's such a. I did end up seeing it on tour, and it's such a lovely
So good,
show.
yeah.
And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was terrible.
Dead on Arrival.
So
Awful.
bad. But yes, we did. We met in New York, and you came and had lunch with me and my daughters, and you were very nice to
Yes.
them.
I love it. No, speaking of being nice to them, I wish when I was growing up, my parents would have given me a Broadway trip. That was very nice of you. Oh my gosh.
Well, that was like we saw Hamilton on that trip, and that
You
could have paid for their college. So sorry, girls, you won't be going to university, but you saw Hamilton on Broadway.
Yeah. It's a tough call. It's a
It's
tough
a tough
call.
call. It was a tough call, and they were like, I'm going to say they were a smidge too young because I think my youngest was
Uh,
8. Like,
that's tough. Yeah.
just
Yeah. She's not getting some of the like deeper work of the show, but she
well,
still has the
she
memories.
wasn't, and it's funny because we saw it again 2 years later, when she was 10, and she was bawling, and I'm like, "You've seen this before?" And she's like, "I just didn't know a lot of the stuff that was happening."
It hit her different. I
Hit
bet the
her.
same thing could happen if she saw it at 12 or 14
It's
again,
so
right?
true.
Because
It's so
it
true.
does, it hits you fresh.
And then there was my son who took a nap.
Oh, boo.
Don't
Oh,
even get me
after you paid
started.
for that.
Don't
Oh
even
my
get me
gosh.
started. An
Oh my
$80
gosh.
nap. Actually,
Right.
more than
Oh,
$80 on that show.
yeah.
Okay, so you have a book. It is called Speaking God from Scratch. It's such a great book. And we share a publisher too, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We're in
We
a
sure do.
progressive Christian publishing house. And your book was such a lovely read. So I wanted you to read a segment from, well, actually, no, I'm going to read a segment from my book that is a nod to yours, and then I'll have you
Okay.
read. So I'm going to read a section on my book that talks about, it's not really speaking God, it's more Christianese. Do you know the
Hmm.
Christianese language? Are you familiar?
Oh.
Have you?
Oh, it is deep in the
It's
heart.
deep, deep.
Deep
It's
in the,
deep.
it cannot be extracted.
In fact, I do have one friend who is not a Christian, and I like to speak Christianese to her because it makes her so uncomfortable. So every time we're together, I just go into like Christian talk.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
so I'm going to talk about Christian. This is from Rage Against the Minivan. I'm going to talk about Christian code speak. So,
Hmm.
Christian code speak is rife in Christian circles, and it can range from annoying to downright toxic. Christians can rely on God speak to distance themselves from personal responsibility or owning their own decisions, and they can also use it to avoid vulnerability. You can blame anything on a prompting from God, from skipping out on a commitment to breaking up with someone. Here's a short glossary of other church terms. What they said, God put it on my heart. What they meant, I'm going to give you unsolicited advice right now. When they say, right. When they say, I'm just going to let the Spirit lead, what they mean is, I did not prepare for this. When they say, we're just going to love on people, what they mean is, we have no tangible way to help people on this mission trip. When they say, how can I pray for your sister specifically? What they mean is, please give me the dirt on your sister. When they say, I'm going to pray about that, what they mean is, no. So that goes on. That goes on for another full page.
Do you know what? I love that it's hilarious, but the other thing is it was also kind of like a low-key serious point
It is.
that you make about vulnerability, and that
It is.
that you can actually use something that makes you feel like you're really digging deep, and it's the opposite. You're actually doing the opposite.
And I extrapolate on that a little bit in the book, but I feel like it's almost like if you've ever gone into a business meeting where someone just talked in whatever the latest business terms are, you know,
Right.
and it's like we're going to take this to scale, and we're going to synergize, and we're going to, you know, and you leave feeling like you just used a lot of words.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, in the circle that I grew up in, it was very much like that.
Yeah.
And that's some of what I write about a little bit in the book, in my book, Learning to Speak Out from Scratch. And so now I want to read a selection that is a nod to your book. You write about family and parenting a lot. And I have this whole section where I basically trace all the motifs of family and the explorations of family through American television, starting with Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, all the way through Modern Family, which is a culmination. Modern Family has all of the pieces that were explored in previous generations packaged into one. So then I talk about the Bible. And I think this is interesting because I tell a story in here about a friend. You'd probably would know who this person is. A pastor friend of mine recently took me to lunch in New York City to talk about how the word family had morphed in recent years. A traditionalist, he felt troubled by these changes. He told me that he believed a, quote, biblical family consisted of one husband who provides for one lovingly submissive wife and some number of obedient biological children. Which family in the Bible do you think is the best model for this? I asked him. I could see his eyes scanning the pages of the sacred text that he loved so much, searching for an example. Adam and Eve's children presumably married each other. Abraham impregnated his slave. Jacob got tricked into marrying the wrong woman and chose to wed the one he really wanted. God blessed both marriages and their children. Moses entered into an interreligious marriage. David was a polygamist. Solomon, whose wisdom is revered by Christians, had a harem of hundreds of concubines. Hosea married a prostitute at God's command, no less. Mary was a teenage child bride who had an out-of-wedlock child while betrothed to an older man. Jesus was a wifeless, childless, wandering rabbi. The Apostle Paul was probably single and had complicated views of marriage and family that were controversial even at the time. And all of Jesus's disciples abandoned their homes and any families they had to join a traveling ministry. Tradition says that after the crucifixion, most disciples either died in foreign lands apart from wives and children or were exiled to far-off places. My pastor friend thought, but he couldn't name a single model of a biblical family in the entire Bible, which makes me wonder, if the Bible is the basis of your notion of family, then an exclusively traditional understanding can't work exactly. The scriptures present a complicated picture of what families look like. We encounter a pattern in which God chooses to work through all kinds of families, many that wouldn't be acceptable or even legal in modern America.
That is one of the many things I loved about your book, is you really are asking us to dismantle some of the cultural ideals we have around the Bible, because so much of what we know as Christianity today is more cultural than scriptural.
Right.
And this notion,
that's right.
I mean, exactly what you said, this notion of the traditional family or traditional family values, we don't even have a model of it in the Bible.
Well, and it's funny because when you think about just that one idea that the man should be the provider and the woman should make the home. I mean, if you read the literature on this, this is a model of family that basically arises in middle-class white America in the middle of the 20th century. If you're a part of a nomadic tribe, millennia ago, everybody's working.
Everyone's
Nobody's just
working.
sitting at home
Right.
hanging pictures on the wall. You're farming, you're building a fire, you're cooking the food. Everybody's doing everything. So
Yeah.
and grandma's there and the aunts and uncles are there, and it's not the nuclear family, this idea.
Yeah.
So David Brooks wrote a piece in the Atlantic actually about why the nuclear family was a bad idea.
Uh-huh.
And he explains like the shrinking, the cutting off, the trimming up into this perfect family has really harmed, I think, a lot of us. And you know, you've got a non-traditional setup. I do too. I'm not married, no picket fence here.
Yeah.
So
You know, and it's
work
funny
out.
too, even if, as we're talking about scripture, you know, the Proverbs 31 woman that we all revere, she had a job. She was selling her stuff. Like that was part of the whole story. She's like, she's hustling, she's selling stuff. And I totally agree, this whole notion of, you know, the traditional family. It's interesting because we live in a very multicultural neighborhood. And so there are a lot of families on my street that are multi-generational in one house. And I'm gonna confess something that's embarrassing to say. I moved into this neighborhood 20 years ago. When I first moved in, the neighbors right across the street from me, there's you know 3-4 families living in one house, and initially I was like, I don't love this, and I love this family now so much. And I watch them and I think they're doing it right. They're completely doing it right because they can all watch each other's kids. No one's going to a nursing home. No, you know, no one needs to have daycare. Like they're just taking care of each other, and it's just they're warm and lovely. And you know, this very isolated idea of family that we have it's difficult.
Right, right. Well, and I've got friends who've adopted children or married to someone of the same gender
Oh
or
yeah,
are not able to have children and have to grieve that.
yeah.
And you
Well,
know, you've got all kinds of things.
I was just joking on Twitter because as I was waiting for us to start, my ex came to pick my kids up, and he and my boyfriend were talking so loud that I had to shush them.
Uh-huh.
But like not arguing. I mean, they were just joking,
Right.
you know, just shooting the shit, talking too
Right.
loud. I'm like, guys, I'm trying to record up here. Can you two?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it's
Yep.
difficult.
Complicated.
Yeah, it's all complicated. It's way more complicated than this notion that we have. And then I wanted to talk about the fact that you and I both grew up in very, you know, traditional families with our fathers being sort of leaders in our denomination.
Hmm.
How do you feel like
Yeah.
that affected your both faith and just personhood to be like the pastor's kid, the kid of, you know, someone who was seen as this big religious leader in your community?
Yeah, I think it's there are positives and negatives. The positives are I don't have like sweaty armpits before I do a Zoom call that I know people will watch
Yeah.
because I've always been on stage and I know what it's like to
Uh-huh.
have to speak in such a way that's people are moved and to be prepared, you know, to know your stuff. Like this is in my blood, and that's really
Yeah.
helped me as an Enneagram 3. On the downside, I will tell you, because it's so funny when I hear the phrase rage against the minivan, the first thing that I thought when I heard it before I deconstructed it and realized it makes perfect sense is I was thinking about the fights we would have as a family in our minivan.
Oh my gosh.
I was thinking about we would rage in the minivan. It was
Yeah.
just the first picture that popped in my mind. I remember the first time I heard this. And we would fight, scream, holler, call each other names. And then you would get to church, and, you know, my dad's this mega church pastor, and there would be a moment where they'd put the car in park and they would turn around and in a very calm voice, they would say, okay, we're at church now.
Mm-hmm.
And when that door opens, you are going to act like a Merritt. And the door would open and a transformation would occur.
You were literally
you
describing
hug.
my childhood.
Really? Same thing? Oh my God, it was like...
Same, like, you're gonna go in and act like a Lowen. Like, same words, same scene, same thing. And I remember we'd pull up and I would just be like, we're such a mess. Like, we're so fake. Like, really, it was just like that, you know, like that.
Yep. Well, and you know, the way that kind of, you know, I would say my parents' desire, need, maybe even to survive in their context, to craft a kind of the appearance of a perfect family.
Yeah.
That had a negative effect on me because it taught me to keep secrets. It taught me to be fake or to be
Totally.
disingenuous. It taught me to protect who I really was. It taught me
Totally.
not to trust people.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of families that were in our church who took on a lot of unnecessary guilt about the state of their own families because they were idolizing a mirage that we were all
Totally.
creating.
Oh my gosh, totally. And I mean, to your point, my parents they had a terrible marriage.
Right.
Terrible. And, I mean, my parents' marriage ended in scandal and in embarrassment, public scandal. And so we were, as we walked out of that car, it was just, we were being fictionalized versions of ourselves. But when you grow up like that, that's what you know. Like that seems
Right.
normal. It seems normal that you
Right.
just fake like you're perfect. And
Right.
I'm also an Enneagram 3, which does not help, because then we care about what we're putting out into the world a lot. Like we get a lot of value in how we're perceived.
Yeah.
And that was a real struggle for me to come out of a family like that and then be honest and vulnerable about my own marital problems. Or, as you said, you end up walking through the world sort of like in a performative fakeness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will tell you, you're bringing this up, and it's so important. The Enneagram 3-ness. It is not lost on me that the Enneagram is often built around the notion of childhood wounds.
Yeah.
That we share these similarities in personality and in upbringing. I remember an English teacher. I was probably in 8th grade, who pulled me aside first day of class. And she said, you need to go ahead and know ahead of time, this was a Christian school, I will expect more from you than I expect from the other kids because I know where you come from.
Sucks.
And it was just like this idea that I was expected to always achieve, always
Mm-hmm.
perform in ways that others weren't. And I think that that's something I've carried with me. And that's something that definitely shaped me into an
Mm-hmm.
achiever, a performer
Yeah,
as a 3.
absolutely. How do you feel like you've come to peace, because it's like it's not necessarily bad to be successful at your job, but it can also force us to be dancing monkeys.
Yep.
How do you
Yep.
feel like you've come to peace with that drive to perform and then also like an obvious like healthy desire to be a real walking, talking person with flaws?
Well, for me, it is a lot of it is about authenticity because they say that for an Enneagram 3, and I know this is true in my life, that like the core sin or shadow or whatever
Mm-hmm.
is deceit.
Yeah.
And so you're a chameleon. You can
Yes.
shapeshift. You can go to church and be one thing, and then hang out with your
Yeah.
friends and be one thing, and be with your parents and be with one thing. And you've learned to shapeshift seamlessly. You kind of have this
Uh-huh.
um, fractured personality, and you're
Totally.
comfortable with that.
Yep.
So what I've really worked on is learning when I'm doing that, and
Mm-hmm.
to intentionally do something that would break that cycle. I'll
That's
often
good.
make a joke that's inappropriate, or if someone tells me, like I wrote an article recently, and somebody said, "Don't write that,"
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, now it's 100% chance I'm writing that.
Mm-hmm.
100% chance. Because I know that what I want to do is please the influential person telling me to do this thing. And now I know that I can't, because my original impulse, the pure impulse, was to write this. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm wrapping myself around
Mm-hmm.
somebody else who's more influential, more powerful, more
Mm-hmm.
successful. So I look for those patterns to deceive. I don't know what do you do? What do you do
Yeah.
to kind of resist those?
I think it's the same. I think when I find myself performing, when I
Mm,
find myself more concerned about what other people think than being true, right?
mm-hmm.
Um, then I have to really take a step back. But I've done a lot. I mean, I know you're a fan of therapy, and I am too. And I've done a lot of work on just um, learning how to let go of worrying about what other people think of me. And I will
Right.
say this. I think it's important to worry about what a small group thinks of you. I'm
Right.
not one of those like, what other people think is none of your business. I actually think what your loved ones, like your chosen family, what they think of you is important. And if they all think you're an asshole, you might be one.
Yeah, right.
But choosing who are the people whose opinion matters, and making that circle really small, and then being, open to feedback from that circle, but then from the rest, just being like, there's really, there's not much I can do. Like, it's okay.
Right.
It's okay if people don't like me. Like, that's okay.
Right.
Right, Jonathan? Right? Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Right?
I'm notarizing. I'm sending you a notarized letter today telling you it's okay. It is interesting though, because I find that the more that I achieve, the more that I just want to achieve. And I don't know if you feel. I remember when my first book came out. I mean, this is your first book, right?
This is my first book. Yeah.
And that is for a 3. That is a Dear Diary moment, right? Nobody is like, the biggest moment is when you write your 3rd book. It's the first book is something special.
Yeah.
How has that? Is that another? Is that another? Sticker on your VBS board? Is that another check mark? How do you feel this differently than maybe you felt success earlier in your life?
It's so funny that you asked that, because I am deep in that struggle right now. I'm 2 weeks out from launch, and I vacillate between being totally at peace and being like, I've done what I can. I've written the best book that I could, and now it goes out into the world, and I don't need to control the outcomes. And then vacillating between like, I have to do well and sell this and promote this, and it's hard because when you're releasing a book, everything around you is pushing you. I mean, you have a team of people who are pushing you to control the outcome, right? And to worry about the numbers and the sales. And so it's hard because it's not just you. It's almost like everything is surrounding you, to be looking at numbers and outcomes. And so it's been a real challenge. I will just say that. Like, I feel like I have done a lot of work, and yet still here I am, kind of face to face with all of these same demons of just wanting to perform well, wanting to do well, wanting to be perceived well, and then really worrying, like having a lot of internal stress and worry. And, it's coming out in the middle of a pandemic, which that's very stressful too. Like what does this do for numbers? There were, speaking engagements and stuff that were lost. So all that to say, I just think our internal struggles, oftentimes it's just a work in progress, right? And this was a challenge. This has been a big challenge. Like, you think you've worked something out, and then you're like, no, I'm still just a little girl who wants to be loved.
Yes,
right?
yes. And I'll tell you, not like I'm, way ahead of you or anything.
Well,
but
you are,
I'll
though.
Tell you, because we're so similar, I
Yeah.
will tell you what has been a struggle for me is after it comes out, because it's the internet.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to wait for the Sunday paper to come out.
Mm-hmm.
You can just hit refresh.
Yeah.
And watching your Amazon ranking, or checking your Google alerts, or seeing your hashtags on social media can become every day you feel like you're taking a pass-fail class.
Yes.
And it's hard.
Totally. I feel that. And I've had to put a lot of self-discipline forward even now, and just, okay, I'm not going to look at reviews every day, or I'm not going to, really slowing down and trying to stay present with my family, that just like, I love that I wrote a book. I really do. But like, what really matters is the kids that are in front of me, the people that I'm in relationship with, and like trying to stay focused on them, and then letting, doing my work for the book, but then letting it do what it does.
Right.
But it's hard. It's really hard.
I mean, it is super hard. Do you find, I want to ask you a question, because, you and I chatted a couple days ago on mine, and you said something, and you just brought it up again. And I meant to ask you. You talked about controlling outcomes. Do you talk
Yes.
about that in your book, by the way?
That is a huge theme in the book. Huge.
Okay.
Because that's also been a lifelong struggle for me. And I went through infertility, I went through miscarriages, and then I went through 2 long adoptions, wanting to control every aspect and not having any control. So letting go of trying to control outcomes is basically the theme of my life.
So how do you as a therapist connect? Because I am the exact same.
Yeah.
If I get into a relationship and I'm not sure where it might go, I cut it off.
Yeah.
Right? Like I have to be constantly assured that it's going to the place I want it to, or I
Yeah.
freak out.
Yeah.
So with you, do you connect that to the way you were brought up? Like, should I connect that to the way I was brought up? Is this impulse or compulsion to control the outcome? Is it about predictability or safety, or any thoughts on how that came to be in you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think it had to have. I think it had to have, because a part of keeping up appearances is knowing where everything's going to go and being in control, right? And because I'm very much the same way. I mean, I got married to like the first serious guy that I dated in college, out of a desire to control the outcome. Like let's get this locked down. I want to make sure this is okay. You know. Yeah, I think it stems from that anxiety of not believing that things will just be okay if I am not stirring and directing everything.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that, or as some of it could be, when other people are in control of the outcomes, you
Yeah.
get screwed.
Well, yeah,
You've
that's
just come to
also
not trust,
happened.
right?
Yes, that
Right?
has happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk about is you wrote a really great piece for The Atlantic, and that headline said it all. Are Christians failing at this COVID crisis? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say what I don't want to do is take, people say take a few bad apples.
Yeah.
The flip side is that these few bad apples have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. So it's not exactly like there's just an apple in a field and you can just avoid it, and it's just this insignificant apple. It's a bad analogy. There are a limited number of Christian leaders who have been, I think, incredibly unhelpful in this crisis. They have fought social distancing. They have peddled conspiracy theories. They have tried to, I just saw an article today. Could this pandemic be an answer to prayer? Because we needed to be taught this lesson. It was at the Godforsaken Gospel Coalition. And it's just, there's the madness and the cruelty that comes from particularly male-dominated, white-dominated, traditionalist, straight, heteronormative Christian expressions. And there's a lot of privilege that comes from that, right? When you can write these things from gated communities and speculate on whether God sent this plague, which is what John Piper did. And actually to say, yeah, you know what? Sometimes God does send plagues. That heartlessness, Karl Barth once said that a Christian should live with a Bible in one hand and the New York Times in the other. And I've often thought about this contrast between the spiritual and the secular, if you will, literature. But here, the New York Times, the cover story is 100,000 deaths were approaching, and it's 1,000 names, little mini obituaries, people who were faithful in their church. They were the founding member of their sewing club. And then you see the literature that's coming from some Christian leaders, and you hold those things together to kind of to borrow and maybe butcher what Barth was getting at. but you have the contrast from what's coming from these two realms. And one is actually far more thoughtful and compassionate. And that's sad. I think that's really sad.
It is sad. I mean, do you feel like, and I will say, as you said, you don't want to paint broad brush strokes. And I have many, many Christian friends who seem to be taking it seriously, having a lot of compassion and empathy, thinking through not just how this affects themselves, but their community at large. Many Christians doing that. But then it does seem to be that a lot of Christians in power or in places of influence, and particularly in politics, are the ones kind of not taking this seriously. And do you think that this is stemming from their faith, or is this yet another of those sort of places where that marriage between Christianity and politics are pushing people to behave in ways that maybe don't even align with their faith?
I think it's somewhat complicated. One, I would say you're getting at something that's true. There was a book written years ago called Faith in the Halls of Power by a guy who at the time was a sociologist at Rice University. And he argued in that book that the real disconnect is not liberals and conservatives necessarily, but among Christians, you have the elites and the populists, which is very similar to what's happening in the political landscape. It's also happening in the religious landscape. So you've got, for example, evangelical leaders are very anti-LGBTQ, but evangelical people are actually becoming more inclusive.
Yeah.
You've got evangelical, very conservative evangelicals. The elites tend to be more open on issues like immigration, but regular folks are not. So you see these divides between the kind of pew-sitting folks and the people at the top, which is why people say, well, this doesn't represent all these people I know. But it's still important to talk about that the people who have power, who pull the levers, who publish the books, who tweet to the masses are still saying these things. And just because 10 people whose platform pale in comparison to this person doesn't mean that we shouldn't be calling that out or talking about how significant it is that guy's acting like a jackass.
Totally. And what is our best way to push back when we feel, as Christians, like maybe we're being misrepresented or the people in leadership are being irresponsible? What's our best way to push back?
Well, this is, believe it or not, part of why I wrote Learning to Speak God from Scratch, because the idea is we will often, when I ask people in this book, I did a survey of more than 1,000 Americans, and I said, how often do you have spiritual religious conversations? And a conversation like this one would be one of those, where you would challenge a religious view or a spiritual view, or you would make a counter argument for the way that some, like, for example, your Trumpy friends, Christian friends on Facebook would. And only 7% of Americans say they have those on a regular basis, that they're willing to bring up something with a religious or spiritual angle. Among practicing Christians, it's only about 16%, about 1 in 8. So people are not having these conversations. And why not? They said they always seem to create tension or arguments. They become too politicized. I've been hurt by these kinds of conversations before. So we don't like the way that, these folks who are misrepresenting Christianity, and we shrink back because we feel kind of icky by it and we don't say anything. But what happens is then the street preacher, the politician who's borrowing all the religious speech, the televangelist who's buying another airplane, they're going to continue to speak about these things. Right. And they will get to hog the microphone because, well, we've all stopped speaking God. And so I think it's important that we provide a loud counter narrative.
I completely agree. And I also think, you're talking about these people that are at the top. And I also think that there's a motivation for some of those people to be more extreme, because that sells books. It gets clicks, it gets shares, and so I feel like we're watching so many leaders sort of push out into corners and be more and more extreme just because it riles up the base.
Right. Yeah. Well, it riles up the base. It will make you more popular.
Mm-hmm.
There are mechanisms in social media, right? Like if I say something that's not controversial, or I say the same thing in a controversial way, which one's going to get more retweets, more shares,
Oh,
more
for sure.
responses, right? So we're incentivized
Yeah.
to the extremes,
Yeah.
and there's money. It can be monetized,
Mm-hmm.
which is something you brought up. There's a famous quote, I think it's by Upton Sinclair, where he says essentially, and I'll paraphrase, it's impossible to get a person to understand something when they're not understanding it is tied to their salary.
Yeah.
Right? When they're not understanding it is actually incentivized,
Mm-hmm.
they want to understand it. So when you say, why is it that a person can't see that these facts lead to this thing? And
Right.
you realize, well, actually, it's making them a lot of money, not understanding the facts.
That's true. That is true.
So,
Or even understanding the facts and willfully ignoring them.
yeah. Or what they do is when you can't deny the facts, you either can reassemble those
Mm-hmm.
facts in new ways that
Yeah.
make it that arrive at a different conclusion, or
Yeah.
you can find an alternate fact, as it's been called, right? Something that's a conspiracy theory,
Yep.
or it's a contrarian person who happens to have a degree in that field, and you put them on a video and it becomes viral, and then there's this cynicism that creeps in.
Yes.
Well, who can know? Who can know about
Yes.
climate change? Who can know?
Mm-hmm.
Because this one person who has a degree in something says that he doesn't believe it.
Yeah.
That's what I think you run into.
Well, it's so tough too because we have, the president of our country now who is very liberal in terms of creating new narratives, sharing things that are not factual. And, I grew up, it's wild, even within my church setting, facts were important, right? Like being accurate and telling the truth was really important. But yet it feels like even some of those same people that taught me those tenets now are accepting a real lack of accuracy and fact from our leader, from our president. Yep. It's wild.
Right. Well, and the stuff that he, today he had shared something, and it was a link to a story about a very well-known media personality who used to be a U.S. congressman, and he resigned because he was having some marital issues or whatever. And Trump shared an article saying, you guys should read this, blah, blah, blah. And it was a story, a conspiracy theory that there was a young female intern who worked in his office who fainted and she hit her head on the desk and died. And this conspiracy theory on a website that was not a news site,
right,
that was raising the specter that maybe this well-known personality murdered this girl because things didn't match up. One report said that she did this, one report said she did this, so things don't match up. So the conspiracy theory is maybe this congressman and now media personality who Trump has an ongoing feud with murdered someone. And you're sharing it from an unreputable site. I had never even, it was like True Stories with a Z or some nonsense. Yeah. And the president of the United States, so it's not just that these things are happening, but the stakes.
Yes.
People are being subtly accused of murder, former U.S. congressman on social media. It's nonsense.
It is. We are living in wild times.
I know. We
really are. And it's so confusing. It is. It's confusing to have been brought up in a faith where you're told that, that Bill Clinton's conduct with a woman mattered to his presidency. And that you're told that, lying is, beyond the pale in a politician. And then watching these same people that taught you that go, well, okay, well, Trump's God's chosen. What?
Right. I literally wrote an article for The Atlantic in 2016 called Trumpist Evangelicals Owe Bill Clinton an Apology.
Yes.
Because if you have abandoned this character still counts, morality matters platform, if now all that really matters is policy, well, you destroyed this person.
Totally.
Day after day, month after month, you destroyed a person on something now you don't even believe. You owe that person an apology.
I know. It's very selectivist. It's very selectivist moral outrage depending on who's the one making us outraged and
that's right.
Whether or not they're on our side.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
that's
wanted to
right.
ask you about one more article you wrote, and this is a little bit of a tangent away from what we're talking about, but it's one that is close to me. You talked about how there are a lot of ex-gay ministries kind of
Yeah.
rising to the forefront again.
Yes. Yeah.
And the reason that this topic is close to my heart is, I studied psychology right out of Bible college, went right into studying psych,
Hmm.
and I initially believed that there were these organizations that could convert someone from being gay, and I bought that. Like
Uh-huh.
that was within my realm of belief. And then I
Uh-huh.
began practicing and seeing LGBT clients, and quickly, pretty
Hmm.
quickly, came to the belief like this is terrible and harmful.
Hmm.
And this was in, this was 20 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a therapist. I'm 45. This was when I was 25, and very quickly changed my tune. But for 20 years later, to see these ministries coming back, what is happening there? Why is there a rise in this again?
Well, the ideas never truly went away.
You're right. I'm
Some
saying that it went away from me, but you're right. It didn't go away from most people. You're right.
Yes, and it crumbled in an organizational sense. Like,
Hmm.
there was in the 1990s. This was a mainstream view.
Hmm.
In I want to say it was Newsweek devoted a whole section in the 1990s to conversion therapy as a
Hmm.
reputable way of
Yeah.
conducting therapy. Now, what happened was is the science fell apart. One, the only study that was conducted that showed it might be possible. The guy who designed the study came out and said and revealed that he had stacked the deck.
Right.
Every other study was now showing not only was it totally ineffective, but that it was incredibly harmful.
Yeah.
That people were experiencing increased incidents of depression, anxiety, psychoses, suicidal tendencies, and ideations. And so the science began to crumble around it. All the medical associations repudiate it. It began later on began to be outlawed for minors. So there was a legal threat to it. And then even the ex-gay ministries woke up to it. So when you had Exodus International, which was a
Right.
huge ex-gay ministry, came out, shut down,
Yeah.
and apologized,
Yeah.
saying they had never seen, in all their years, they had never seen anybody's change their sexual orientation.
Hmm.
It seemed to have finally crumbled.
Yeah.
And there was a new way of understanding, for conservatives, understanding what it means to be a, quote, same-sex attracted person,
Right.
which for them became just a celibacy movement
Right.
rather than a conversion movement.
Right. So cool.
There has
We're
been
not
a
going to
shift
change
back.
you, but
Mhm.
but you're going to be alone.
Yes. Yes.
You won't get to
Yeah.
enjoy a romantic or familial relationship with the person that you would love.
Nope. That's right. And they
Also
tried
terrible.
to kind of
Two terrible
they tried
options.
there were some attempts to try to like soften the blow. There was a guy named Wesley Hill who wrote about a concept. Who's a nice guy and a thoughtful guy, I think, but he wrote about this concept of spiritual friendship, where a biological family could adopt an LGBT person, and you go to all the soccer games and you live within
Hmm.
family, but you still don't have the romantic component. There were a lot of attempts to make that work. I don't think that this celibacy movement has ever had the intellectual heft to survive. So it's
Hmm.
like, if you believe that gay relationships are wrong, you really do have to believe that you should, if you can, try not to be that thing.
Yeah.
Try not to have those thoughts. I mean, if you're ideating about killing your wife, I'm not going to say, hey, that's cool. You just keep ideating, but as long as you don't actually kill her, you're okay.
Right.
Like, I mean, this is sort of the idea that Jesus brings forward in the Sermon on the Mount, that like, even if you think about hatred, even if you think about it, you've already done the act.
Hmm.
That the
Hmm.
heart matters. It's not just behavioral. We're not robots. Our heart matters. So if you believe that the behavior is wrong, it seems that the Christian position is that well, then the whole thing's wrong. You have to cut it
Right.
out. You have to
Right.
try to pray it away. And the argument then becomes the most illogical thing that conservative Christians do, which is they make decisions based on possibility and not probability. So they'll
Hmm.
say things like, well, don't you believe God is powerful enough to change
Right.
sexual orientation? Well, I believe God's powerful enough to let you walk through this wall.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stop you the fourth time you bang your head and you've got blood running down your face. I'm going to
Hmm.
say, that's not probable that that's going to happen. You shouldn't make a decision based on in the realm of
Right.
possibility somewhere. First of all, I think it's possible that God could do that. I don't think God does do that. We
Hmm.
observe what God does and doesn't do, and that's how we live our lives. And God does not do that. I think there's a reason God does not do that. I think it's very destructive for a person to even try
Yeah.
to do that. And so, but it has not kept people from living in accordance with the way they read the text. And so now you have a new crop of people who I profiled in this piece in the Washington Post who are now reverting back. Now they're not using clinical terms.
Hmm.
They're mystifying it. They're
Hmm.
mystifying it.
Hmm.
Whereas
Hmm.
whereas I think before it was like there wanted to be a clinical component. They won't go there. But
Yeah.
they marry people of the opposite gender. They flaunt their relationships. They talk about change being possible. Bill Johnson out at in Redding, California, which is I think not too far from you, huge church. They have a brand new Exgay ministry, shiny new Exgay ministry with an Instagram following and everything. So you are getting a softer, gentler, cooler
Yes.
version of it, and it's like opt
Yes.
in. It's opt in. Hey, only if you
Yeah.
change, we're here for you.
Yeah, and it is, isn't it? It's a softer, it's a cooler. There's tattoos. There's
Yep.
like, you know, and maybe even your presentation can still be, gender nonconforming,
Right.
which is wild, But then underneath it is still a shaming, like,
Self-hatred.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I would. Who would want to live with the belief that a core part of who you are, your womanness,
yeah,
right? Or
yeah,
your curiosity, even take it to
yeah,
something that is still a part of you that's in a less tight orbit if you don't like
yeah,
the comparison. Some core part of you that God hates that.
yeah,
Every moment God hates that.
right,
Um, I think you will end up with an unbelievable amount of psychological stress, even if you
yeah.
try to do that with a little bit of like, gentle Jesus, meek and mild wallpaper over it.
It's tough though, and I'm sure you feel this too because you grew up this way. I I have empathy and understanding for the people who read the scripture a certain way. Like I get it. And I did for a long time. What are some of the things that shifted your theological thinking? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
how were you able to move from, an upbringing that says this is sinful to a place now of I can still hold a faith and be affirming?
As I've thought through my core transformations on this issue, there are areas that I'm still in discernment as we kind of take out all like gender. If you take a big bucket,
Yeah.
gender, sexuality, etc. I would say I'm always in a period of ever discerning, but
Yeah.
it's been kind of in waves or like concentric
Yes.
circles
Yes.
as I've gone through a process of really studying the scriptures and meeting people and hearing stories. I think for me ultimately, and maybe this is just how the evangelical dies hard, is the Bible. I
Yeah.
actually have gone back, read the Bible,
Yeah.
and I have started to see that there are some things that I thought were true. I went to seminary 2 times. Now I'm living here at a third seminary, taking classes for a third go around. But you start to learn things. Here's a great example. If you're discerning like I've been discerning, I'll just put you in my seat.
Yeah.
People will say, well, the Bible says that homosexuality is wrong. And I'll say, well, did you know that the word homosexuality was never used until the late 1800s? And they go, what do you mean? I'm just a journalist. That's a fact. A fact is that this word, homosexuality, as a defining characteristic of personhood, was introduced in German medical literature in the late 1800s. That's a fact. Does that change what you think? And then they go, well, my Bible says homosexuality is a sin. And I go, well, a couple things. One, just some more facts. One, the Bible was not written in English. It was written in, well, a range of languages, but Hebrew, Greek, a lot of Greek. Do you read New Testament Greek? Because I went and took it and I read it. Well,
I bet you did.
Yeah, I took a lot of it. I know. And they'll go, well, no, I don't. And I'll say, well, do you know what it says? And I go, well, take this word right here that you're pointing to that says that. Do you know that's a created word? There's a bunch of words smushed together and we don't really find it elsewhere. So we're just trying to figure out what it means. Oh, no, I didn't know that. And I go, do you know that the word homosexuality never appeared in an English language Bible until the 1940s? They go, what do you mean? No, it never was there. For 1940 some years, it never appeared in any of those. And actually it would be less than that because those writings came later than Jesus. But for a long, long time, that wasn't the word. So as I just started to just allow facts to be facts.
Yes.
And not become emotional triggers.
Yeah.
I've been able to hear people's stories. I've been able to read the Bible with fresh eyes. I've been able to really, I think, come to a more open-handed embrace of some of those things. But it has only been through really surveying the facts, reading the Bible, meeting people, making space for stories. It hasn't been like I had to throw away being a Christian to allow myself to hear those stories or to read those texts afresh. I love Jesus as much as I did before. I've learned to love people more than I used to, and I've learned to love myself more than I used to through the process, and I've learned to love God more than I used to. But I haven't changed in some kind of like, I haven't become a monster.
And that is, I do appreciate that so much about your book, is that it really is teaching how to take a fresh look at Scripture, and not in a way to dismantle our faith, but in a way to push in. I really like that about your book.
Well, thanks. Well, you know what? I can't wait to read your book.
I know. I need to send you one.
I have read the opening chapters.
Okay.
But I need the book. I need a paper book. I want to cuddle. Yes.
I'm going to send you one. I'm going to send you one you can hold and cuddle.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I'll take a photograph.
All right. My last question for you.
Okay.
What is saving your self-care right now? Two things. I want two things. It could be a show, it could be a practice, it could be a book, it could be a candle. What are two things that are keeping your self-care good right now?
Here are two things. One, I have a regular meditation practice, and I have a range of practices, but I am regularly meditating. And so that could be a meditation I do before bed. If I could swing around, I could show you. I have like a little altar in my house, and maybe I can.
You should show us. Yeah.
So if you see over here,
I love that.
I've got earphones. So I have my my meditation cushion is down here.
I love it.
My plant died, but normally I like to have some greenery. I just put a little plant over there. We've got St. Francis. I've got my sage here. I love sage, and especially in my morning meditation, I love sage and some Palo Santo. I do have some crystals that most of which are gifts. This is an icon from a monastery I went to in New Mexico. They hang them over their beds, and it is an iconographer, a New Mexican iconographer who's now passed away. And then
I love those bowls. We have one of those too.
I love it. It's just great. After I'll sit down, I'll have morning prayer. I will
love it.
I'll meditate, and then that's just a way to kind of, bring yourself back
totally
to reality.
Yes,
so it's
like a reset
that's
button.
My area.
Love
So
it.
I do a lot of meditating.
Okay.
And then the other one is that I'm quarantined now back in the city with a family. I don't know if you know David and Kate Gunger, and they have four kids, and they live downstairs. Like this morning, I brought my coffee down. We watched church together. You know, we sing. Last night, actually, this book, I don't know if you've seen it, but I'm going to recommend another book. But this was what I read them for bedtime last night. I ordered it and I had to read it first to see, but I love it. So if anybody's looking for fun kiddie reads, you know Shel Silverstein?
Yeah, yeah.
This is a little off the beaten path, and it relates to some of what we've talked about. It's called The Missing Piece Meets the Big O. And this missing piece, which is the little triangle, is trying to find a circle that has a pizza cut,
an opening for it. Oh.
And he finds a couple, and then he grows, and then they don't like him anymore, and so they get rid of him. And so he meets this big O, and this big O's like, well, I don't have space for you. Or he says, you don't have space for me. And the big O's like, you can roll on your own. And as he rolls, the sharp edges roll out, and he becomes a big O. And then he and the big O, without being codependent, essentially, to be their own selves, kind of roll off into the distance.
I love this. How have I not gotten this book yet? It's just like,
it's such a great, and I bought it for cheap on Amazon used, and it's like got the kind of, you know, the traditional, like,
classic Shel Silverstein.
Yeah.
So fun.
So the family, just to go and to put the kids to bed, you know, they have one room with 4 bunk beds, New York apartment, and to read them a story, and then they sing a song together before they go to sleep every night. And it's like, to be Uncle Jonathan is definitely saving my self-care.
I love that. Yeah. I'm
what
sure
about you?
You're a good Uncle Jonathan. You know, I really have to say, too, as trite as it sounds, really being present with my kids and just, you know, trying to, like, every night trying to find a way to, I mean, it's weird because as an Enneagram 3, we want to, like, make meaning out of this whole thing, right? We want to, like, what did we do in our quarantine? What did we achieve? And I think one way that I'm trying to do that in a way that is sane for me is having a meaningful conversation with my kids every night. And that is, it fills my need to do something because that's a big value for me. But it also just makes me feel good. And then for me, getting out of the house and in nature, because, you know, I think like, and really getting off the internet and just like, for me, it's the beach. It's going to the beach and remembering that the world is still turning and the waves are still crashing, and you know that's always a good reset button for me, is being outside. Yeah,
it's one of the things that I'm really lucky in the city, because I live in the seminary campus, so I basically live on like a private park. And then I ride my bike, which is why I was late to our call. I try to get out every day too, and I ride up the highway, which next time you visit, you'll stay with me. You'll see this place. You'll love this little seminary.
I've been there. I visited with Shauna, so I have been there. It's such a lovely campus. Did? Yes.
Did I see you that time?
No, you were out, the last time I was in New York, you were out of town.
Oh, well, next time you come, we'll go bike riding. We'll do all my random fun things.
Love it.
But I at least have a little piece of nature here, so that's nice.
That's nice. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's always fun.
Oh my gosh, it is my pleasure, and I cannot wait to get your book.
Well, I hope other people will check yours out too. They will both be linked up below wherever you're watching. And people can find you at jonathanmerritt.com. Awesome. Thanks, friend.
Awesome. Thank you.